All right, welcome. Welcome to our class. Open your Bibles to the book of Psalms. We're moving more quickly than we did the last two times, and we will in the book of Psalms as well. I promise. We're not going to do all 150 of them by any means. We're going to do enough of them to give you a feel, I hope, that's what I'm planning to do, hoping to do, to give you a feel for the Jewish hymn book. And it doesn't mean they don't sing hymns that have been written since biblical times. They do, of course. I've been in Temple Israel to worship more than I have Congregation B'nai Emunah, but I know at Temple Israel they have a very wonderfully talented young cantor, a young woman cantor, and she does wonderful things with her music. We worshiped there on a Friday night again just last March. We were there for a whole service, and it was very meaningful. So they certainly do have music that's been composed since biblical times, but the book of Psalms is a hymn book. It is a hymn book of the Jews, and we will take it as such. Let's pray. God, we open this all-important book of yours and trust that you will help us understand what we need to know about you, things forever true about you, things forever true about us, about how you initiate right relationship with us, and if we respond in appropriate ways, we can know ourselves rightly related to you by your grace. We promise to follow if you will lead us. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, let me make a couple of general statements and we'll get right underway. Because Psalms is a hymn book, like our hymn book, it is not in chronological order. If you were to open the Methodist hymn book and start looking at the hymns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you will discover they're not in chronological order. Instead, those who prepared this hymn book, and it was prepared by a committee, voted for this task back in 1988. Actually in 84 they began their work, and then in 88 it was approved. They had 4 years. In 1988 at the General Conference it was approved as the official hymn book of the United Methodist Church, and then in 1989 it actually started rolling off the presses, and we ordered some of the very first ones printed. The hymns are grouped by type instead of in chronological order. And the book of Psalms is not perfectly divided into type, but it's more by type than it is any other way. So I will not attempt to go into all the organization of the book of Psalms and why a certain psalm appears where it does. We will just look at it, but when I think it's important to point out that this hymn comes later or earlier, I'll try to do that. And that's true of the first one. Look at Psalm number 1. This psalm comes from a period called the Wisdom period. The Wisdom period. After the Jews had been decimated by the Assyrians in 722, the 10 northern tribes, and then by the Babylonians in 587, 586, there were some who said, well, we have been beaten over the head century after century. We have not stayed close to our God. We have not done the right things. Now, surely we are wiser than that. Surely we are wiser. And so this psalm is out of that wisdom period where the poet is trying to encourage the people to do the right things and avoid doing the wrong things. And surely if we do the right things, God will take better care of us than God's done up to this point. We've had a lot of troubles, so we've got to do things better. So look with me. In your New Revised Standard Version, it begins with the word happy. I'm not thrilled about that word because happy comes from the same root as happenstance. And it's almost, if the right things happen to you, then you can be happy. And if the right things aren't happening to you, you don't have to be happy. I really prefer older translations where we have the word blessed. Blessed. But if one is blessed, if a whole people know themselves to be blessed, then it does make them happy if they know that. So, we'll forgive the translators, but I don't like the word as much. But let's see what it says nonetheless. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked. Okay, because that's dumb. I mean, that's what this poet's trying to say. That's really dumb to do that. And we've got to be smarter. No more being dumb. We've got to be smarter. So, happy or blessed are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. Scoffers are just people who find fault with everything. Everything. Fault finders. You remember the little Abner cartoon strip? There was a character named Joe that always had a little black cloud hanging over him. Wherever he went, whatever was going on. I mean, there was thunder and lightning coming out of this little cloud always. It was raining on Joe, even if it wasn't raining on anybody else. And I would encourage you to avoid people who just suck all the joy out of life. And there are people. They just absorb any happiness that there is, just drawing it out of every situation. If you're spending time with people, even if you call them friends, if it's a constant drain, that these are just negative people. Negative people don't help you. They don't help you. My mother's family were poor, but they tended to be really happy, kind to each other. I've told you, if somebody came to visit, everybody in the house ran out to meet them. My father's family had a little bit more, not much. They were farmers too, but they did own their own farm where my mother's people were sharecroppers. But I remember as a little boy, I enjoyed going to my grandmother's house for Sunday lunch after church. Didn't happen every week, but when we had when we did have those big dinners at my grandmother's house afterward, it was wonderful. As far as the food, and I enjoyed being with the kids, but the adults sat around and argued politics, and none of them knew much, but they argued about what little they didn't know or thought they did know, and they weren't fun people. They weren't fun people to be around. Avoid people that just draw all the light out of any situation and cause dark. Scoffers. They just, make fun of, belittle, play down almost anything and everything. But those who can not follow the wicked and not go after them and not be scoffers, they are blessed because their delight is in the Torah of the I am who I am. Okay, if we're going to be smart, if we're going to be wise, then we have to take Torah seriously. And on His, that is Yahweh, on His Torah, they meditate day and night. So they are like trees planted by streams of water. Remember, this is coming out of a desert country. So when you see a big tree in the distance, it stands out all by itself, you can be sure there's a spring of water close by. Because it couldn't reach that kind of height if it didn't have water in rainy seasons and dry seasons. There's a source of water there, or that big tree wouldn't be there. Okay. They are like trees planted by streams of water which yield their fruit in its season. They produce, they do good things. Their leaves do not wither. Trees that have no water, they wither. Leaves fall off. In all that they do, they prosper. Now here's the problem, of course. You and I have just finished Job. And not all good people end up with a lot of money. You'll do better if you're a good person than if you're a bad, most of the time. Some bad people make a lot of money. That is, if you practice good stewardship, if you make the most of what you have, you can end up with more than you started with. We know that, but we also know from Job, this big long book we've just finished of Job, that sometimes people die young and poor and without being surrounded by lots of children and grandchildren who are very good people. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. And you know that means the husks of the wheat. When they would flail it, on the ground, flail it, scoop it up, and then toss it, in big flat-looking baskets. Toss it up in the air, and the prevailing winds off the Mediterranean would blow away the chaff and let the seeds fall back into the basket. The wicked are like that, chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of those who stand right. For Yahweh watches over the way of those who stand right. The way of the wicked will perish. Sounds really good, doesn't it? Sounds really good. It would be nice if it were always true. Let's go to chapter 8. Psalm 8, I should say. Psalm 8. This is when you learned when you were a child, and it's still one of the really beautiful ones. O Yahweh, or O I am who I am, our sovereign. Okay, sovereign means the one who has the power, the one who alone rules or reigns. How majestic is your name in all the earth. And what is the name? I am who I am. You've set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants you founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. God has ways of protecting that which God wishes to endure. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals, that you care for them. I mean, since the Hubble telescope, we know a lot more about how big the universe really is. When I was a child growing up outside of town, the nights could be very dark and you could really see the stars quite well. The Milky Way, I remember having the Milky Way pointed out to me when I was a little boy. And now we know there are billions of stars in our Milky Way. We're a part of that galaxy. But it's a very mediocre-sized galaxy as galaxies go. And it's one of billions, each one containing billions of stars. So ancients could tell there were lots of stars, and you and I know now they didn't have a clue just how many there really are. So what are people? Verse 5. Yet you have made them a little lower than Elohim, a God. In this case, a very specific God. Somehow you've made them like you. Crown them with glory and honor. You've given them dominion over the works of your hands. And dominion is coming from a Latin word, dominus. We have it in dominate and so on. In this case, God is the sovereign. We've already affirmed that in the very first verse. God is the sovereign, but He said, take care of what I've created. Take care of what I've created. Handed it over to us. You've put all things under their feet. All sheep and oxen, beasts of the field, birds of the air, fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. Oh, I am who I am. Our sovereign. How majestic is your name in all the earth. Beautiful? Yeah. Let's skip over to 13. Not all Psalms are happy. So affirming, as Psalm 8, you have this type as well. And there are many of them. Again, I'm just going to lift up some types of hymns. How long, O I am who I am? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul? and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Yahweh, my Elohim. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say, I've prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your chesed. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to Yahweh because he has dealt bountifully with me. So it begins with all the troubles that this poet is having. You and I know troubles. Last night I was brushing my teeth when the 10 o'clock news came on. Did you see that anguished father whose little boy committed suicide last spring, 6 months ago, because he had been bullied so unmercifully? And he came home from school and hanged himself. And this father was saying, 6 months later, we're just trying to live hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute. Just get through another minute, another hour. And the father cried and said, he counted on me to protect him, and I didn't. But you didn't know what was happening. Well, no, but I should have known. I mean, he's really beating up on himself. And I felt so sorry for him. This morning I was shaving, and the news on television was saying that once again the Portuguese have said they'll take a look at this little girl who suddenly disappeared 3 years ago, almost 3.5. Gail and I were in Europe, in England, as a matter of fact, when that happened. And what big news it was. You know, England stays wet, damp, cold all winter. And so those who can often go to southernmost Portugal or Spain or the south of France on the Mediterranean in the wintertime. And this was just winter turning to spring in this young family. The physician had gone down to Portugal, and they left their 3 little ones asleep in a condo there and went downstairs to eat at a restaurant. When they came back, 2 were there, 1 was gone. 1 child. And they were asking the reporter who said he flew into Portugal the day after this happened, and had covered the story now for 3.5 years. And he was talking about how the mother and father have aged. What this has done to them, that they've never found a trace of that child. 3.5 years. And how they've aged. So what troubles do you have? What troubles do I have? That we have sorrow in our heart. How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? But in many of the hymns, that's what these are, remember, these are hymns, poems set to music, chanted. We are trying for some years now, after the Panzeras helped us learn how to cantor the Psalms. They do that at Temple Israel, Congregation B'nai Emunah, all the time. The cantor sings, the congregation responds. The cantor sings, the congregation responds. We don't call our director of music our cantor, so sometimes he is the one. Last Sunday, Joel sang that role, but this morning, Terry Michael, sings that role. A federal judge is a very important member of our church, faithful worshiper, member of the choir. He's our cantor today. So one sings and the other sings. One sings and the other sings. But notice how they end. I mean, even those where the poet feels so beaten up, they often end with this affirmation. I trusted in your chesed. My heart shall rejoice. I know there's a setting right time. Things will be set right sometime, somewhere. Look at verse 16. Psalm 16. Psalm 16. Here's another one that begins negatively, stating the situation, not so exactingly that you and I can know exactly what was going on, but there's trouble for sure. This one begins with the name, the older name the Jews had known, and then shifts to the name Moses learned at the burning bush. Protect me, O Elohim, for in you I take refuge. Refuge is used in the same sense that a fortress is. All old cities had an acropolis. Akro in Greek, high polis, town, a high town. We usually think of Athens because of all the beautiful statuary and the temple that once stood atop their high hill. But all communities picked out the highest hill and they built the wall around it. Gail and I were in Caen, France in April. And here was the fortress of William the Conqueror. It's more than 1,000 years old. I mean, the land around Caen basically is flat. It's not so far from the Atlantic Ocean. But they found the biggest hill in Caen, built the wall around it, still there, over 1,000 years later. But this poet knows you can't build a wall high enough that somebody can't breach the walls. So in you, O Elohim, I take refuge. I say to the I am who I am. You are my I am who I am. I have no good apart from you. As for the holy ones in the land, they are the noble in whom is all my delight. Those who choose another Elohim multiply their sorrows. They drink offerings of blood I will not pour out or take their names upon my lips. But the I am who I am is my chosen portion, my cup. You hold my lot. Remember, they cast lots sometimes to know what was going to happen next. Well, you hold my future, if you would. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I have a goodly heritage. We know what boundary lines are, but it was not only property. Canaan was the land they believed God had given to them, but boundary lines also can have to do with what's permitted and what's not permitted. Torah helps me know what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not supposed to do. And we're told that little children feel more comfortable when they have parents who are willing to help them know what the boundaries are. What's proper, what's not proper, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And they push and push till they find out what that boundary is. And if there is none, they just go berserk and wild. We see them in the supermarkets all the time. No boundaries. Okay. Verse 7, I bless the I am who I am, who gives me counsel. Now remember that Torah doesn't mean law. Our scholars can't come up with a better word in English, so they always translate law. The word Torah, it doesn't mean law. It means the teachings or the instructions. And so here's that idea in verse 7. I bless the I am who gives me counsel, instructions, teaches me. I told you years ago about Steven Spielberg. You know he's Jewish. He made Schindler's List as a gift to his parents, grandparents. Okay. Well, he was on that, I forgot what it's called, studio something or other, where the guy ends up, James Lipton, ends up every time with this questionnaire done by Pivot in France, and he likes it, so he gives them these questions. And the last question is, what's your favorite word, what's your least favorite word, what's your favorite curse word, and all such stuff. But they finally get to the last one. If there is a heaven, what do you hope to hear when you get to the gate? And Steven Spielberg, I saw this years ago, and he said, thank you, Steven, for remembering. Remembering what you were taught. The Torah is the instruction. It's the teachings. Through it, God gives us counsel. In the night also, my heart instructs me. I sleep and things sort out. I keep Yahweh always before me. Because He is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. I can stand right here. I can do what I'm supposed to do because He will be right there for me. Therefore my heart is glad and my soul rejoices. My body also rests secure. For you do not give me up to Sheol. Sheol, remember, dampness, darkness, like a cave, a tomb, death. Or let your faithful one see the pit. And the pit translates the word. Remember, all the writers of the Bible, even New Testament, thought the earth was flat. Water above, water on all four sides of this flat place that they thought they lived, and water underneath. And that underneath water is sometimes called the abyss, sometimes called the pit. Sheol is dampness, darkness like a tomb, but below that is absolute chaos. Okay. It was released in Noah's time. Rains came down, water also came up. You show me the path of life. Okay. The Torah, you see, is the instruction. It's the teaching. You see the commercial now about a fellow and family planning their financial future. Follow the green line. I don't remember whose it is. I know ads don't do their job when you can't remember what they are. I don't remember the company, but I like the concept. When the fellow, sees something he wants, this expensive car or whatever, follow the green line. Follow the green line. Fidelity, that's it. Thank you, Barbara. It's fidelity, that's it. Okay. Follow the green line. I like the idea, and it's right here in the Bible. But the green line is the Torah for this poet. The Torah. The Torah shows you the way. Okay. In your presence there is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Let's skip to Psalm 19. We're just going to do part of 19, but I want to lift up a few verses that I think are really significant. You see again in this one that the early Israelites, of course, lived in the desert, and they lived in tents. I told you that on one of our trips to Israel, it's been a long day. We'd been down to Masada, where it's so hot. We were there in June, so that our boys could go with us when they were still students. We've been down to Masada and at En-Gedi and the banks of the Dead Sea. It was 112, 14 degrees. And we finally came back up to Jericho, and you don't even want to get out and see Jericho. It's so hot, and the bus is so wonderfully cool. But we get out and look at the ruins of Jericho a few minutes and get back on this wonderful air-conditioned coach. And now it's taking us up this winding road into Jerusalem for the night, when suddenly I was sitting up near the guide. So from time to time they'd say, you think people need a bathroom? Stop. They need something to drink, whatever. And suddenly she said, wait. Told the driver, stop, pull over. And we pulled over beside the road, and here were 3 black tents in this ungodly heat, sides rolled up, and a little fire going in the middle, like our Native Americans learned to do. If you build a little fire, it creates a little draft, a breeze. It creates a breeze. And suddenly this woman woke everybody up. Some were dozing as we went back into Jerusalem. Who wants to meet Abraham and Sarah? That's what she asked. Who wants to meet Abraham and Sarah? They're right there. Her people. Now these were Bedouins, but that's how her people began. So the brightest light they had was a campfire. At night is the brightest light they had. So you look up and you see the sun at daytime, and as it's setting and rising, you see the moon. You see all these stars. And see how many poets pick up on that. The heavens are telling the glory of, they use the older name, Elohim, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Firmament, okay, look down at the footnote. You see there's a little letter down at the bottom. You and I think of firmament as being soil, earth. Not so in this context. It's dome. Dome. They tried to figure out how God could hold back all that water. I mean, it's blue. From horizon to horizon, it's blue, and it leaks through on you. That must be water. How does God hold it back? So in some passages in the Hebrew Scriptures, They describe it as a tent, a canopy. They call it a canopy. I mean, that's the way they keep the water off of them. They set up a tent. So God must have some giant canopy. But here, the word is, later they learned to take a flat piece of metal and ever so gently hammer it into the shape of a bowl without punching through. We saw them do this in the Casbah down in Morocco. There were people in that Casbah in Morocco who still were doing this. Flat piece of metal, and so gently hammer it till they had a bowl. And so they thought, maybe that's the way God did it. He turned a bowl upside down. So look, firmament here is very much what heavens is. In this context it is. It's what they see in the firmament, the dome, the bowl that holds back the waters. Skip on down to verse 7. The Torah of the I am who I am is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of Yahweh are sure. Here again you see the idea of boundaries. The Torah sets boundaries for us. Remember when Rabbi Kushner came to speak here in Tulsa after his book had sold lots of copies, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And he was asked, somebody here in Tulsa sent in a question, do you ever wish you could have a cheeseburger or bacon and eggs? And the rabbi said, I had rather know that the God who made the heavens and the earth cares what I have for dinner. I thought that was good. The Torah of Yahweh is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of Yahweh are sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of Yahweh are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of Yahweh is clear. See how many different ways it can talk about teachings, the counsel, the way. We just have to do what God's telling us to do and not do what He tells us not to do. How difficult is that? The fear of Yahweh is pure. Now, fear, remember, I like better to stand in awe of. Standing in awe of the I am who I am is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances, another word for Torah here, you see, of Yahweh are true and righteous. That is the way to stand right with everything in all of creation. If we just do Torah, what He tells us to do, and avoid doing what He tells us not to do. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter than honey. And I've told you that they didn't have much sweet in their diet. Honey was what when they came up on a swarm of bees, it was wonderful. Sort of like they didn't have much fat in their diet. Poor people couldn't afford to kill their little animals. Couldn't afford to kill them. They needed the milk. They needed to make cheese. They didn't kill and eat them, except on the rarest of occasions. So they didn't have much fat in the diet, and they didn't have much sweet in the diet. You ever just sit around and want something sweet? Gee. My brother decided to try the Atkins diet. He's a really great guy. But a crazy thing, he said, he got to the point he was dreaming every night about waffles and honey. Waffles and honey, waffles and maple syrup. That's all he could think about after no carbohydrates. Skip to verse 14. This you've heard, I'm sure lots of preachers begin their sermons with this. I had a pastor when I was in high school who always used these words to begin his sermon. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O I am who I am, my rock and my redeemer. Isn't that a great poem? Skip over to 20. Let's look at it just a second. 20 again is a poet who has trouble. I am who I am. Answer me, Yahweh, answer you in the day of trouble. The name of the El of Jacob protect you. May He send you help from the set-apart place, the sanctuary, and give you support from Zion. Zion is where David began to build the new capital city and where eventually Solomon would build the temple. May He remember all your offerings and regard with favor your burnt sacrifices. Selah. And this has something to do with the direction for how the poem was to be sung. May He grant you your heart's desire and fulfill all your plans. Oh, by the way, you know why they don't tell you what Selah means? They don't know. It's one of those words they don't know just what it means. So they don't have a clue. They just put the word. Maybe one day somebody will find something scratched on a rock somewhere and say, we know what Selah means. May He grant you your heart's desire and fulfill all your plans. May we shout for joy over your victory. And in the name of our Elohim, set up our banners. May Yahweh fill all your petitions. Now I know that Yahweh will help His anointed. And in those days, the anointed was the king. The king. In Hebrew, it is the word Messiah. I know Yahweh will help His Messiah. He will answer him from His holy heaven with mighty victories by His right hand. Some take pride in chariots, some in horses. But our pride is in the name of the I am who I am, our Elohim. They who count on chariots and horses will collapse and fall, but we shall rise and stand upright. And then if you haven't understood who the Messiah is, it ends by saying, give victory to the King, O Yahweh. Answer us when we call. Let's look at 23 just a moment. Psalm 23. There's a reason, of course, why this one is so beloved in Judaism and Christianity. I won't spend long here because I know you've heard me talk about this psalm many times before. It begins again with the name given to Moses at the burning bush. The name. The I am who I am is my shepherd. Now notice down in verse 3, it talks about leading me. Never had seen that quite the way I did after our first trip to Israel. When we started on this coach out of Jerusalem going south, I was amazed. I'd never been in such a real desert in my life. And as we got farther, I saw these little tiny lines on the sides of the hills, and they were on both sides of the highway. These little lines on the sides of the hills. And we went some miles and wondered, what in the world is that? And we got out a little farther, and you could see that's where the sheep walked, the goats. And in Israel, the shepherds lead the sheep and goats. They don't drive them so much as lead them. And the sheep follow. And they follow on these, it's hard to go up and down on a mountain. You stay on the same level. And that's why all those little lines are there. Because once they'd start walking, they'd walk, at that same elevation pretty much for a long way. If the I am who I am is your shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. This is in desert country, folks. So if He can find a green pasture for you, that's really good. He leads me beside still waters. Sheep are not very aggressive animals. When they're attacked by a predator, they just sort of hunker down, and an old dog, coyote, or something can eat them up. And they don't need rushing waters when the spring rains or deep winter rains come and the wadis fill with water. Sheep need calm waters. Calm waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths. We used to say in paths of righteousness. The scholars are trying to help you here. This is what it really means. He leads me in right paths where you stand right with all the people around you, and the relationship you have with each one is different. But there's a right relationship and there's a wrong relationship. I mean, one's relationship with one's spouse is not the same as with one's children, but it's not the same with two children. Ought not be. Same amount of love, but you don't love them the same because they're not the same. And if you have grandchildren, you should love them all the same amount, but you can't do love the same with all of them because they're not the same. They're different. And so how you give this one the same amount of love the way he or she can handle that, deal with that, and the way you do another is always difficult. But he will lead you in those paths of doing things the right way. But things don't always go well, as we know, and so you have verse 4. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And I've pointed out to you in sermons before that I remember Dr. Metzger saying they were really hesitant to change anything in the 23rd Psalm. I mean, the way it's translated, because they know that so many people knew it by heart from the King James Version and loved it. And so they really struggled with that. So here they use another word from the King James rendering that has changed meaning since the time of King James. It's the word comfort. You and I, when we talk about being comfortable, I've told you it can mean a Sunday afternoon when you've had a nice big lunch and you stretch out on the couch. Don't turn on football, it's too loud. Turn on golf. And you just drift away while they're saying, he's approaching 18th green. Oh, yes, he's approaching the 18th green. Okay, that's what comfort usually means to us. But those of you who had Latin, like I did, know that's not what the word meant originally. C-O-M was originally C-U-M. Cum means with. Fortes in Latin, same word we have in fort and fortitude. It's a shelter, it's a stronghold, or it has to do with strength. Now look what this poet says. He doesn't say with color television and my own chip and dip and my favorite soft drink, I'm really comfortable. It says with a rod. That's a stick. A club. A staff is a long and crooked stick. So when you go down in that darkest valley, you can almost picture David going down to meet Goliath. You and I go into that valley to meet death. You don't need a soft pillow. You need a shepherd who's standing down there with a club in one hand and a long crooked stick with the other to draw you closer in while he flails away at your enemies. And Paul would say, God has now defeated the last big enemy we had, death. Death itself. Okay? So if you see rod and staff, then you know comfort meant something different. It meant strength or power. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. That was the kindest thing you could do to somebody who's been out in the desert, the wind blowing, you beating you to death. That you get to, take a bath and re-oil yourself, if you would. How wonderful chapstick is when you really have chapped lips, How wonderful a little cream is when your hands are really, really dry. You not only give me something to drink, you run my cup over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me. The word follow is not a good word, I think. The word in Hebrew has more to do with dogs chasing an animal, almost. It's pursue. Remember Thompson's great poem called The Hound of Heaven? this great African-American preacher, wrote about the Hound of Heaven. This huge dog that you can hear barking, coming closer and closer. And so he runs, and he runs and runs and runs, for 60 years, 70 years, and finally he falls on his face and says, I can't run anymore, you just have to eat me up. And the old dog licks him on the face. Gee, he's run for 60 years from something that wanted to lick him on the face. The word pursue here, you see, is not just goodness and mercy following along behind you, but pursuing you. I mean, if you ever look around, God is wanting goodness to come to you. God is wanting mercy to come to you. And I shall dwell in the house of the I am who I am my whole life long. Probably the poet here meant what Tevye meant. If I were a rich man, I'd go to the synagogue every day and inquire of the elders. And this poet probably means too, if I can't imagine anything better than not having to tend sheep and goats and milk cows and all this sort of thing. If I could just go to the temple of the Lord every day, how wonderful that would be. All my life. But the King James scholars, because we're living this side of Jesus Christ, believed it means something about eternity as well. That the eternal house of the Lord is where we get to live forever by the grace of God, by the gift of God. It is so. All right, Psalm 24, let's look just a second. The earth is Yahweh's, and all that's in it, the world and those who live in it, for He has founded it on the seas. Okay, notice what it says? I mean, this is the way they understood. The earth was like Venice, Italy. Water underneath, pillars going down into the muckety gunk. So God founded the earth. It's talking about the earth and the world. It's not round to them. They don't know it's round. It's flat to them. And so it somehow had to be founded upon the waters. God did that. Established it on the rivers. Who shall ascend the hill of Yahweh? And who shall stand in His set-apart place? Okay, now stop just a second. Psalm 24 has been understood differently for the last 45 years or so, since a Scandinavian named Dr. Sigmund Mowinckel wrote a 2-volume commentary on the Psalms. And he started lifting up Psalms like Psalm 24 and saying he was convinced the Jews had an annual enthronement festival. He knew, as do others, that the pagans at harvest time had a rip-snorting big party. They thought they had to wake up the gods and goddess of fertility up there, make them get out of bed, start stomping around, thunder, then it would rain, and the whole process would begin again. And the Jews also celebrate their New Year, as you know, in the fall. Okay, they come to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the New Year and the Day of Atonement, in the fall. Happened in September this year. It varies a little because they're on the lunar calendar for their religious observances, but it's always in the fall, September, October. Harvest time. But Dr. Mowinckel traced Psalms like this that led him to believe the pagans at harvest time threw a rip-snorting big party, ate too much, drank too much, had sex with as many as possible, trying to wake up the gods and goddesses of fertility. And then finally, as a culmination to their big festival, every little tribe would hoist their king up on a throne and bring him in and say, "Behold our king, he is our God." And Sigmund Mowinckel became convinced, and has convinced much of the Christian world, that the Jews were having a similar time, and yet it was so different. When they harvested and knew they could make it through another winter, they started introspection. How have we failed this year? What good might we have done that we didn't get done? What harm did we do that we never should have done? And it all culminated with prayers and offerings that the high priest would go into the tent of presence and finally, after Solomon's temple, into the Holy of Holies and pray to God to move from the seat of judgment to the seat of mercy. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, at-one-ment. Okay, see if you see that in this hymn. The procession up the Temple Mount. It's not Mount Everest, just a hill, but it is a hill. Up the Temple Mount, they bring this beautiful box containing the tablets of the Ten Commandments. But there is nothing on the outside of the box that's supposed to represent God. It's an empty throne, if you will. And instead of saying, "Behold our King, He is our God," "Behold our God, He is our King." He is ultimately our Messiah, our Savior. Okay? Who shall ascend the hill of Yahweh? Who shall stand in His holy place? Those who have clean hands and pure hearts, who do not lift up their souls to what is false and do not swear deceitfully. They will receive blessing from Yahweh, vindication from the Elohim of their salvation. Such is the company of those who seek Him, who seek the face of the Elohim of Jacob. And he believed, Dr. Mowinkle, that at the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and then the 10 days later of Atonement, Yom Kippur, they would have a parade, if you would, with their box, this beautiful wooden box holding the Ten Commandments. And they would come up to the east gates. The Muslims sealed them up centuries ago, but come up to the east gates and pound on the gate. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Now, is this the same as the king of all these tribes in Canaan? No, indeed. So the poet asks, who is the King of glory? The I am who I am, strong and mighty. The I am who I am, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Just to be sure, who is this King of glory? The I am who I am. Of all the hosts of heaven, He is the King of glory. Right? Dr. Sigmund Mowinkle did that. All right. Psalm 27 is one of my favorites. I like it very much. Just notice how it begins. The I am who I am is my light. Again, this was among a people whose brightest light at night was a campfire. Their oil lamps, we know, we have found them. They were little tiny, tiny things. They had just a little bit of olive oil in them, a tiny little wick. The campfire was the biggest light they had at night. They knew that the days grew shorter and shorter in the fall of the year. As they looked, those of us in the northern hemisphere, the sun seems to be moving south away from us. We know now it has to do with the tilt of the Earth's axis and so on, but it seems to be moving away from us southward. And ancients were afraid one year it might just keep going. And if it just kept going, then we all freeze to death. And so we know that ancients learned how to line up stones and cut cracks and openings in stones so that on that shortest day of the year, and in the middle of June, the longest day of the year, light would shine through one of those cracks and they would know, tomorrow it's going to be longer. If tomorrow is a little bit longer, then the sun isn't going away, it's coming back again. But this ancient poet says, as important as the sun is, as important as the moon is, the I am who I am is my light. my salvation. Salvation in Hebrew has to do, there were centuries where they had no concept of life after death. It has to do with wholeness, fullness, right standing. I stand right with God, and that makes me whole. I stand right with others if I do Torah, and that makes me whole. God is the author of my salvation. So whom shall I fear? The I am who I am is the stronghold, and here again that's a fortress. He's the wall, if you would, that protects me. He's the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Skip to verse 4. One thing I ask of Yahweh, that will I seek after, to live in the house of Yahweh all the days of my life. See, that's very similar to the way the 23rd Psalm ends. If I could just go to the temple every day. When we read the Gospels, in Luke's Gospel, what do we find? An old woman who comes to the temple every day and gets to see baby Jesus. An old man who comes to the temple every day. He's been coming for years and gets to behold God's long-awaited Messiah. All right. I think that's enough of that one. Let's move on. Well, let's look at verse 13 of 27, because this is such a powerful affirmation. I believe I shall see the goodness of the I am who I am in the land of the living. Wait for the I am who I am. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the I am who I am. Can you see why those words would mean so much to a people who've been force-marched off to Babylon, whose last picture of their city, it was in flames? The temple ransacked, the palace ransacked, everything in flames, stones of their fortress being tossed, tumbled down, gates being burned off the hinges. Can you see what these words would mean to someone at Auschwitz, at Bergen-Belsen? Jews knew these words by heart. Elie Wiesel would talk about that first night he was pushed off the train at Auschwitz, and he could smell the burning bodies. Smell them. A smell he said he would never get out of his nose as long as he lived. He saw hell that night, he said. Here's a boy who, when he and his family were arrested, his father was teaching him Torah. I believe I shall see the goodness of the I am who I am in the land of the living. There's got to be something beyond Auschwitz, beyond Birkenau, beyond Bergen-Belsen and all the others. It just has to be. Wait. I mean, be patient. Doesn't happen as soon as we want. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the I am who I am. These beautiful, great poets who wrote so much for us. Well, maybe we should stop there. We've gone a pretty long way. I'm going to put down 29. I want to say a word or two about 29. So let's see here. Next Sunday will be the 14th, November 14. I'm going to put Psalm 29. If you haven't been to church yet, we have orchestra today. We have a children's choir. And today we've flipped the two choirs. The chancel choir sang at 8:30. And the chapel choir you're going to get to hear at 11. They really are a wonderful group, and they're looking forward with great anticipation to singing for you.